Hello and welcome everyone, I'm Ari Lax, and today we're going to be playing with a deck that I've had some great statements about the quality of this deck in the past, but after it finished in the finals of Grand Prix Las Vegas, and then won the Star City Games Invitational in Roanoke last weekend in the hands of Brian Koval, whose list I'm playing today, I am going to be playing with Modern Death and Taxes. So this is a deck that I've basically beaten with everything I've played for the last year, but I started doing pretty well recently. So why is that? What actually made this good? Part of it is the metagame has condensed a lot. Death Shadow has really preyed upon a lot of the decks that really just push this deck out of the metagame. So just a lot of the kind of hybrid. I don't know if the right way. All of the true unfair decks in the format really feel like they've just been kicked out by Death Shadow. It's really hard to compete with the aggressive start plus Thoughtseize plus counter spells plus just everything about Death Shadow is a giant disaster for collected company decks. I don't even know if that's 100% true. Specifically, the counters company deck, Death Shadow is a disaster for. Various combo decks that this deck really struggles to interact with have also been kicked out. In exchange, you have these mid-rangey decks that this deck can just go toe-to-toe with. Another part of the success is that Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, and Mirren Crusader have gotten a lot better. Very important. And Ghost Quarter and Tectonic Edge. Well, Ghost Quarter really has just gotten a lot better too. The Shadow decks are light on basics. If they get strip mined, they kind of just get completely wrecked. Decks just have been cutting on lands. And then with Eldrazi being a huge deck, having the Ghost Quarters is really nice. So to kind of go through the composition of Brian's winning deck, you're going to see 23 lands, but a lot of value lands. A lot of ways to turn extra lands into something that matters. So you have Ghost Quarter with Leonin Arbiter to make a strip mine effect, Tectonic Edges to further push the land destruction angle, Horizon Canopies to filter into actual cards, and then there's a Castle and a Cavern just kind of because you can. Cavern's actually pretty bad in these decks. If you just look at your creature types, you got Human, Cat Cleric, that's a Soldier, Human Soldier, Angel, Horror, look at the horror. What is this? What does this match up with? Nothing. You've got, 14 humans in your deck? And, 5 angels and some elementals? It just, nothing aligns in the slightest. You're kind of just playing Cavern to cast whichever spell you need to cast the most. It's kind of funny because often you'll have to name something like Elemental just for the second white source. Really not a fan of that card, but moving along, it's not that big a deal to have one. And just a million planes. You are exploiting the fact that you are cashing your lands by playing Aether Vial. You can afford to use your Ghost Quarters or Horizon Canopies or whatever if you're tapping Aether Vial for virtual mana every turn. You're trying to stall it on 2 or 3 depending on the contents of your hand. Usually 3. Because casting a 2-drop through using your lands for stuff is pretty easy, but casting a 3 a little harder. Also just more net mana per activation, but if you have a bunch of 2s to deploy, then by all means stall it on 2. On 1, you have Paths. Kind of important to have a way to kill stuff in this format. Your deck otherwise can't really fight like a 6/6. And then Thraben Inspector. It's a card. It replaces itself with another card. I don't have a lot to say about the Thraben Inspector, honestly. And then Weathered Wayfarer, which is kind of cool. Sadly, there's no Onslaught version for me to drop into this deck on this account, but we'll play with the white-bordered one. Nothing wrong with some 9th edition action. So Wayfarer really lets you start Ghost Quarter chaining people or whatever. Worth noting, you can activate a Ghost Quarter and then activate Wayfarer in response. If you have 2 lands and one's a quarter and they have 2 lands, you can activate them with the ability on the stack. You will have less lands, so you can Wayfarer at that exact time. And then, really you can translate it also into Horizon Canopy draws, which is a nice thing to do. On 2, you have your anti-mana contingent. Arbiter to chip away against their fetch lands. So one thing worth noting about with this deck is that if you know you are playing against this deck, you are going to want to use your fetch lands as early as possible. There's also an aspect of playing against Leonin Arbiter and Ghost Quarter where you want to leave... At times you want to leave a... Like, if you don't need the red now, and you feel like you're going to have access to a fetch for later, exposing both of your red sources just so both can get Ghost Quartered without you using one of them is pretty bad. Let's say you have Death Shadow or whatever. We'll say, you have 2 red sources in your Death Shadow deck, like I was playing. Or, like, 2 fetchable black sources in your deck. That's kind of awkward, so sometimes you can consider leaving one in your deck if you aren't utilizing the colored mana from the second. And also assuming you're going to be able to fetch later. So there's a lot of ifs and stuff there, but that's something to consider. Also worth noting, I believe that I can say at least one of our opponents on Magic Online is going to mess this up and fail to pay for Arbiter before fetching or something. The interface is not the cleanest. You have to like click the Arbiter and activate independently. You aren't easily granted it. So if you're playing against Leonin Arbiter on Magic Online, be aware of that. Like I said, Thali's gotten a lot better. There's a lot more Serum Visions in the format, things like that. And then a couple rando other creatures. Revoker in the top 4 showed its worth, taking out Walking Ballista. Brian's opponent cast Walking Ballista. I believe he was playing as Michael in the top 4. And Brian, in response, tapped Ether Vial, put this in, named the Ballista on the stack. That was a trick that I really liked in Chord of Calling decks. You could chord for something in response to them casting. They're like Karn Liberated, named Karn Liberated. So similar tricks can be pulled here. But generally a fine Magic card. You don't want to draw a ton of them because they're kind of weak, but when they're good, they're great. Then Avenger, similar thing. Sometimes you just want a 3-power flyer. The 3 drops, Blade Splicer is kind of nice. I do like that Blade Splicer, Resto, Flicker Wisp is like an actual grindy engine for this deck that it some previous builds have kind of skewed in favor of like losing the kitchen finks or whatever they do. Flicker Wisp, you can pull some nasty tricks off with this in Ether Vial. Just the way it works, if you like Flicker Wisp something on their end step, it's exiled until your end step because it's a return at the beginning of the next end step, so it triggers. You can also do things where you have like, if you have a Flicker Wisp, then you cast a second Flicker Wisp. You can Flicker Wisp your Flicker Wisp. It comes back on your end step, and then you can like Flicker Wisp their land or their creature, so it's exiled on their turn. Kind of cool. And then Mirror Crusader, with this move, just the way the Death Shadow decks have been configured, they haven't had a lot of Lightning Bolts lately, or Tar Fires. So Mirror Crusader has really become an all-star. Provided a really powerful clock, a way to finish games. You'll notice there's not really a way to pump Mirror Crusader in our deck, but just 3 mana unkillable creatures. Etched Champion is played, and this card's kind of an Etched Champion. Then Resto Angels, again, you'll notice a slightly heavier emphasis on Flicker and Flyers. You're trying to get value out of your Blade Slicers, go a little wide, and then, especially because Death Shadow costs itself so much life, you're pushing in the last couple damage. Or the Tron decks are like medium decks now, not big decks. So you're trying to generate enough power and toughness to go toe-to-toe with like a Reality Smasher or something. So these little incremental advantages have gotten a lot better. Moving to the sideboard, we've got a mix of like a little bit less true hate actually than I am used to seeing these kinds of decks. So there's some Forge Tenders against the various sweepers. You are a little soft to that, especially like Anger of the Gods. Sun Lances against Mana Dork decks or other cheap creature decks. Not in the mirror, obviously. Non-white, just emphasize that. Another Mirror Crusader for when that card's good. And then some Dust Dawns against larger creature decks, which incidentally are Tron and Shadow. And then your hate cards. You have Cages and Relics against Dredge. Relics, just being able to play Relic in like this kind of deck's pretty awesome. And then Stony Silence against Affinity. I will say, don't do the thing where you have Ether Vial and Stony Silence. That looks really dumb. Just quick talk about sideboard plans. Against fair decks, you actually are sideboarding out an Ether Vial usually. It's better in this deck than in like Merfolk, but one of the ways they can catch you is by forcing you down the road of drawing too many bricks, like Ether Vials or whatever, and then dying because you just have those cards. So you do want to trim on one against the fair decks and just use your mana normally. I have played a warm-up match with this deck, and I figured I would share it as kind of an intro to things that I expect to see when I'm winning games. The first game of the match, went Plains Go. My opponent went Arbor Elf. Well, that's a card, I guess, off of Forest. They're definitely on either red-green, like the mono-green Devotion deck that recently, I believe it was in top 32 of the Modern Open in Roanoke. It may have been in the Modern Classic. I haven't checked, but either that or they're playing red-green Ponzo. Whatever. Plains, second Plains, Leon and Arbiter, go. My opponent untaps, and they go Utopia Sprawl my Forest, play a Keswick Wolf Run, untap my Forest, Stone Ring you. And then I untap and Ghost Quarter the Forest, and they concede the game. So, if you out LD the LD deck, that's pretty cool for your mono white deck. And hopefully we can just make our opponents not play a lot of spells. That is the definition of death and taxes.